Welcome to the AI Policy Podcast, a podcast by the Wadhwani Center for AI and Advanced Technologies at CSIS. I'm Gregory C. Allen.
And I'm Andrew Schwartz.
Join us as we dive into the world of AI policy, where we'll discuss the implications of this transformative technology for national security, geopolitics, and global governance.
Greg, good to be back with you for the AI Policy Podcast. Missed out last week, but hey, we're here today.
Hey, welcome back. Good to have you back.
All right, let's just get into it today. We've got a lot going on in the AI world. On Tuesday, the EU and Japan announced a cooperation agreement between the EU's AI office and Japan's AI Safety Institute. Is this a big deal? And can you remind our audience what this process is and why it matters?
I think there's a few interesting things going on here. Number one, AI safety as a part of international AI diplomacy continues to be a massive focus. This is the continuation of the work that was begun at the UK AI Safety Summit, and that has a lot of downstream work. A lot of different organizations and countries are creating these AI safety institutes. The UK launched theirs at the UK AI Summit. The United States shortly thereafter announced that they were going to create one. Now Japan has created one as well, and the EU, which as part of the EU AI Act created an AI office as part of the European Commission, has said that this AI office is also going to be their functional equivalent of an AI safety institute. So that has all been going on in the background. Governments around the world building organizational bureaucratic capacity to make good on their commitments around AI safety. What's interesting about this agreement is that while you're seeing a lot of interesting work happen in multilateral institutions such as the G7, which we've talked about on the podcast before, you're also seeing a proliferation of bilateral initiatives. And this EU Japan bilateral reflects the fact that both countries have actually sought to make a name for themselves as leaders in global AI governance. In the case of Japan, that has been primarily centered around the Hiroshima AI process, which they kicked off at last G7, and that's a part of this EU deal as well.
All right, this may be a silly question, Greg, but can you explain to us actually what an AI Safety Institute does?
Well, that is to be determined by the countries that are creating it. What we can say is what some of the current AI safety institutes envision themselves doing. The real model here is the United Kingdom, and their analogy, which I've heard from UK diplomats, is they're thinking a lot about the automobile safety analogy, which is to say there's these independent regulatory bodies and companies can come to those regulatory bodies and say, please test my car for safety. And they get a 3-star rating, they get a 4-star rating, they get a 5-star rating, and consumers see that 5-star rating and they know that that means something. That means a government body has put this car through the rigmarole, and then the other side of it has been certified as best-in-class safety capabilities.
Right, and we don't like to eat anything that's not approved by USDA, and we don't like to take medicine that's not approved by the FDA, so this makes sense.
Exactly. So that doesn't exist in AI yet. And the AI safety institutes, to a certain extent, are trying to create that. And they're trying to create that in the context of these conversations about a lot of the risks of AI. You and I have talked about, for example, the letter that was released in May 2023 talking about catastrophic AI risks. You know, this is a technology that over the long term, folks are talking about rivaling that of human intelligence. And the generalized concern is that the pace of growth in technological capabilities is outpacing the growth in our safety capabilities. And that's true on a technical basis. It's also true on a bureaucratic capacity basis. And so some safety institutes have a basic research kind of function. They're trying to advance the state of the art in AI safety techniques and technologies. And other safety institutes are focused around the sort of bureaucratic capacity. We are the third party that you are going to call when you want an independent test of your AI systems. And we are also going to disseminate guidance around AI safety best practices. And some institutes are doing all three of those things that I just described. So this is a bureaucratic paradigm that is still being formed, and we're watching it come to life in real time.
Okay, so I think I get it. And it sounds to me like what's going to happen is every country is going to have its own AI safety institute or like-minded body. What are we doing here?
So in the United States, we have already created our AI Safety Institute, and there's been a great deal of progress just in the past couple weeks around staffing up this organization. So on April 16th, Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, and it's worth noting again for our audience that the U.S. AI Safety Institute is housed at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is part of the Department of Commerce. So Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo has announced that former OpenAI researcher Paul Christiano is going to be the head of AI safety at the U.S. AI Safety Institute. And Paul Christiano, who is best known in the AI research community as one of the original architects of the idea of reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is one of the key safety approaches that is implemented in systems such as ChatGPT and all of ChatGPT's competitors. So this is somebody who has real chops in the AI community and has been working at a nonprofit for a while now, thinking about AI safety stuff, and he is coming to the U.S. AI Safety Institute. And I think that brings a lot of technical credibility to what's going on at the Institute.
Well, we'll have to have him on this podcast as soon as possible.
I'm sure it's coming soon.
All right. Back to this agreement between the EU and Japan. A joint statement noted that Japanese companies will be encouraged to participate in the EU's AI Pact as part of the agreement. What exactly is the AI Pact, and how does it relate to the EU's broader AI governance strategy?
I think there's two things about the AI Pact that are potentially interesting. Number one is the European Union is trying to encourage companies to get ready to comply with the requirements of the EU AI Act. And some of those requirements are still in the process of being written. So companies are invited to demonstrate and share their commitment towards the objectives enshrined in the EU AI Act and demonstrate how they are preparing for its implementation. And I think an additional benefit, at least from the EU's perspective, is that they're already thinking about the internationalization of the EU AI Act. So folks who are listening probably remember that with GDPR, the European Commission had an entire team whose only job was to go abroad to explain the virtues of the GDPR and try and persuade other countries to set up equivalent regulatory regimes. And the AI Pact is not being described precisely in those terms, but as an observer, I'm seeing sort of the same bureaucratic muscle movements gear up. And I think the AI Pact has a bit of that going on.
All right. So finally on this issue, and you touched on this, you mentioned the Hiroshima AI process. How should we make sense of the different roles multilateral forums play in AI governance?
Well, I think there's two things going on. So for one, there's a little bit of a tit for tat, I think, going on between the EU and Japan. They're saying, hey, if you encourage Japanese companies to come on board with the AI Pact, we will encourage European companies to come on board with the Hiroshima AI process. So they're sort of combining their forces to strengthen their AI governance efforts and make them a little bit more international in scope. The Hiroshima AI process really had its origins in international institutions. It began with the G7. Now it appears that a lot of the substantive work is going to be fleshed out in the OECD context, another really important multilateral institution. And the AI Pact is fundamentally rooted in the European Union, which is, that single market for all kinds of goods, including digital technologies. But because the EU is really excited about the Brussels effect, where their regulations for the EU market actually shape the overall ones, that's why they're excited that Japan is now encouraging Japanese companies to do this. Worth noting here, of course, that this is all voluntary, right? No Japanese companies at this stage are going to be forced to comply with European regulations unless they're operated in the European market.
Do you see companies down the line being forced into compliance?
There's plenty of examples of voluntary commitments starting as voluntary and ultimately becoming compulsory. And that can happen in multiple ways. It happens a lot in the United States just because of liability law and the way our courts system work. If you want to prove that you are not being negligent, saying that you are abiding by some kind of voluntary standards can be really helpful to saying that you are not negligent, and therefore our liability law has a mechanism by which voluntary stuff can become compulsory over time. The other thing that can happen is bureaucracies can get excited. Whenever there is some kind of catastrophe, whether it's in the AI market or the automobile market or in any market, sometimes something bad happens, and then people look around for what is stuff that we can do to say we are responding to this crisis, and taking voluntary standards and making them compulsory is one of the traditional things that bureaucratic institutions reach for. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen in this case.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. And I want to talk about the latest moves the Biden administration's making related to AI safety.
We already jumped the gun a little bit here with Paul Christiano, but that's actually one part of really fleshing out the entire AI Safety Institute's team. So Paul Christiano is going to be the head of AI safety,
right?
And he's really bringing the sort of technical chops to all of this. You've also got Mark Lateranero, who we've engaged with in the past, over the past couple of years when he was at the White House, and he's going to be leading international collaboration. So on this podcast, we're constantly talking about the diplomatic and international relations dimensions to AI policy. Mark's job is going to be all day, every day, thinking about those types of topics.
Okay, so what else do we know about this initiative so far and the Biden administration's motivations for creating it?
Well, I would say it does tie back to what happened at the UK AI Safety Summit. And now the Biden administration, because the UK put up £100 million to fund that institute and brought in Yoshua Bengio, one of the leading researchers in all of AI, not just AI safety for decades, the Biden administration felt that they had to have something comparable in response. And the AI Safety Institute, I think their current funding is around $10 million per year. I guess I haven't looked at what it is in the FY25 budget request, but it's not quite at the same scope and scale as the UK Institute, but it is something that is clearly high profile. It's actually getting attention in the White House.
All right, let's finish today with one of the things that's closest to your heart and my heart, and that is AI's collaborations with DoD.
Yes, so we're going from trying to prevent accidental and unintentional harm to the use of force in the case of AI.
Right. So what did the Air Force just do? It selected several firms, and it's working on this next stages of what they call Collaborative Combat Aircraft, CCA, the CCA program. What is the program, and why does this represent such groundbreaking news?
Yeah, so the Collaborative Combat Aircraft has a name that I think is designed to be intentionally tame and boring, frankly, but this is actually kind of a big deal. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft is the Air Force's flagship program for autonomous aircraft. So autonomous aircraft as in there is no pilot, and unlike the drones that we're all familiar with from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there is no pilot in the cockpit, and there is no remote pilot who is remote controlling the aircraft through a satellite communications link. This is a genuinely autonomous aircraft. The robot is flying the aircraft.
You're sending it and it goes, and that's it.
Well, not quite that's it.
There's no joystick. There's nobody.
Yeah, there's definitely no joystick. There's definitely nobody flying the aircraft. But the reason why it's called the Collaborative Combat Aircraft is it's really envisioned as part of a squadron. And so the pilot is going to be in an F-35 or another, advanced crewed aircraft. And then these are going to be the loyal wingmen in the force that is being projected with this program. So the program is not finished.
I'm feeling like Top Gun 3 has got a theme here already.
There was a terrible movie made about autonomous aircraft called Stealth, starring Jamie Foxx, which I definitely don't recommend anybody listening go watch. But this is a recurring theme in Air Force policy debates. The point is this is a real step change in the Air Force's willingness to put big dollars behind aircraft that don't have pilots. And folks might remember, if they were following the debates at the time, there was a lot of Air Force cultural challenges with the Predator drones, with the Reaper drones, because folks said these aren't real pilots, but DoD leadership and the Army in particular said this is delivering incredible military value, and we need you, the Air Force, to produce a lot more of these, including the people who are remotely piloting them. Well, that cultural change and that cultural difficulty that they had with remotely piloted drones, that's going to be an even bigger cultural shift for the Air Force now, thinking about these truly autonomous drones. Now, when I say autonomous, I want to emphasize that the definition of an autonomous weapon system in the Department of Defense is around the selection and engagement of targets without intervention by a human operator. It's not precisely clear that these aircraft are going to meet that definition. It could be the case that the human who is piloting the F-35 might get a request, can I engage this target from the loyal wingman?
They're still responding to the squad leader.
Yeah, you could
even though it's a robot, it's under the command of that captain who's in the F-35.
Exactly. That I think is the mindset. This is very much a human in the loop type of a program. But of course, you're inventing a lot of technologies that would be relevant if you decide to adopt a different paradigm down the road. So when we say collaborative combat aircraft, we're sort of thinking in that human in the loop mindset for aircraft and military aircraft. But they're going to invent a lot of stuff in the course of this program that could potentially be taken in a different direction down the road.
Well, I mean, my question is can I get one of these CCAs to be my wingman when I'm dealing with my 16-year-old son?
Well, I don't think you want to blow your 16-year-old son up.
I don't want to blow him up, but I do want to shake him up a little.
Yeah, maybe just let him listen to a sonic boom. Well, actually, unfortunately not, because these aircraft are going to be subsonic.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a big deal. And I think it's interesting to put this in the context of other autonomous efforts that are going on in the Department of Defense. Well, actually, I think before we do that, we should talk about who won, right? So, and exactly what stage in the story we are. So this is a funded design, maturation, and development contract. This is not a production contract. So they're not saying this is the collaborative combat aircraft and we're going to buy 100 of them, 1,000 of them, et cetera. What happened is the Air Force One provided contract awards to Anduril, which is a venture capital-backed, non-traditional defense tech startup that's also a unicorn, at least in terms of valuation. And then General Atomics, which is well known as the manufacturer of the Predator and Reaper drones, which were so influential in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Who did they beat? Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. And those three companies were synonymous with fighter aircraft over the past literally 30, 40 years.
So this is a different approach.
This is a big deal. And I think it's not just that they're going more autonomous, they're also saying that we want different types of companies with different business models building that. And I think that's exciting for those who have been concerned about inadequate competition in the defense industrial base. There's a lot of programs, whether it's nuclear submarines, certain categories of missiles, certain categories of rockets, certain categories of aircraft, where it is kind of a monopoly, at least within that individual market. And Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks has expressed, concern about just the lack of competition in so many different sectors of the defense industrial base. Well, this is a non-traditional defense tech company who is being invited to come compete with the traditional defense primes, and at this stage now has won a spot on a program of record.
Greg, this is all super interesting. I'm sure it's something we're going to come back to over and over as we develop more autonomous or collaborative weapons.
Well, I don't think you and I are going to be developing autonomous and
Not
collaborative
us,
weapons.
as the United States, and as the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, military autonomy is one of the priorities of the Department of Defense. And I think it's worth connecting this to what else is going on. So you and I talked about, I think it was last year, about the replicator program in the Department of Defense. And the idea there was to field thousands of attritable, autonomous drones in a time frame of 18 to 24 months. This program is not part of Replicator. When we say attritable, we mean this aircraft is so cheap that you don't even mind when it gets shot down by the enemy, practically. Well, these things are going to cost ballpark $25, $30 million a pop. So you definitely do mind if they get shot down by the enemy. But, that's about a fourth of what an F-35 aircraft costs.
Right.
And while this can't do everything that an
Not to mention there's not a person that gets shot down.
Exactly. So while this thing can't do everything that an F-35 can do, it's a lot cheaper than an F-35, and you don't have to buy, as many F-35s to do all the things that this aircraft can do. So it is part of that trying to find new ways to project power cheaper, but it's not the replicator approach, which is, very tiny, very cheap drones. This is a beefy aircraft, but both of them are intended for thinking about the potential war in the Taiwan Strait. That's what Replicator's thinking about. That's what the collaborative combat aircraft is thinking about.
Greg, so what is the next step in this program, and when can we expect to see these collaborative aircraft fly?
So as I said, this is a funded development contract. According to the Department of Defense budget request for fiscal year 2025, they're thinking about spending $9 billion over the next 5 years on these programs. And at this stage, it's still a development effort. So the General Atomics aircraft and the Anduril aircraft have to be sort of matured in their design. There has to go through a test and evaluation process. But the thought here is that there will continue to be competition in this program. The next increment of work is going to be handed out in 2025, 2026 timeframe. And what's interesting is that they're going to continue competing this forever, essentially. Well, maybe not forever, but the point is that Anduril and General Atomics are the ones who are getting money from the Air Force to advance their design. But if Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Northrop Grumman don't like the fact that they're not getting money from the DoD, they have an opportunity to invest their own money, try and come up with something better, and then say, when we move to the next phase of the program, actually, you should pick us again. And I think that is a really interesting contractual approach by the Department of Defense, saying, companies like Anduril are raising money from venture capitalists. I think their Series E back in 2022 was around $1.5 billion of venture capital investment. So these are investors who are putting up their own money to bring new capabilities into the DoD. Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, put up your own money if you want to tell us that we picked wrong and you can do better. Show us. And I think that's a really good statement from the part of the DoD to preserve competition in this program.
Greg, thanks for helping us understand these issues today, and we will be back in a couple weeks.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the AI Policy Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to visit our website, csis.org, for show notes and our research reports. This podcast was produced by David Lotfi, Isaac Goldston, Isabel Burns, and Sadie McCullough. See you next time.